Hey guys, welcome to your favorite podcast, Smart, Intellectual, Knowledgeable African. I'm S.I.K.A, and as always, it's good to be back. Today, we are diving into the second part of our exciting conversation with Chioma about Africa's economic future. If you haven't caught up with our first discussion, make sure to check it out after or before this video. So, in this episode, we are going to explore how the continent can maximize its revenue from international trade of its raw resources. We are going to look at export of minerals, metals to agriculture and even beyond. Because we all know that Africa is a treasure trove to natural wealth. But here's the big question. How can we ensure that the continent benefits fairly from these resources? So, in the second part, we will be talking about everything from value addition, diversifying export, negotiating better trade deals, and leveraging technology. So, I hope you're ready and as excited as I am to actually learn and listen to one of the most powerful perspectives on this topic from our very special guest, Chioma.
And we can do it well. We just need to invest in that. And that's where the challenge is, making sure we invest in it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really like what you just say, especially when you stress the need to actually like depart from the Western, approach when it comes to development. And I think that's really strong and powerful, actually. But I mean, another, like, I'm playing the devil's advocate here because it's very interesting to...
Does the devil need an advocate?
Yeah, I mean, So the thing is, I hear you. But another risk with that kind of policy that we also need to think about, like, what Africa is losing in terms of like revenue.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about like holding off on the existing stock of natural resources.
Yeah.
But if I follow your proposal, like imagine now we are intra trading in Africa. That means first a lot in terms of revenue. So how is Africa is going to make up for the money that we are losing, knowing that nowadays we have to pay civil servant.
Yes.
Like we also have government has to keep developing and keep financing program in the health industry, education industry, in terms of also transport. Like we need to keep developing the continent. So the problem with this approach is, well, it helps us, anticipate or maybe make a strong point, to the international community. But on the other side, we are also putting our development agenda at risk.
Yeah.
Because already with what we are making, it's not enough to actually finance development program on the continent. So imagine now willingly, refusing to make more money, but wanting to promote some sort of an economic revolution. I'm not saying that it's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it's right. It's risky. Like it's way risky, because the way I see it is like when you take countries like America, for instance, they are also producer of crude oil, but like we all know that they don't export. Why do they don't do that? It's because American always think about like a doom. They have that kind of mindset in their mind. They're always thinking about the end of the world, wanting to save their people first and stuff. So they always, thinking ahead. And I suspect America is not the only developed economy with that kind of, futuristic agenda.
Yeah.
If you also take the European Union, I'm pretty sure that whatever natural resources they're buying from Africa, they're buying for the current needs, but they're also buying to make sure that they can meet the future needs. So while we are busy fighting, with them in terms, because we don't have, or because we believe that we are not earning the right price, from our natural resources, they might be in a position where they've already anticipated that kind of situation. And second, they are also in a position where they are the one owning, the revenue that we need to develop our continent. So how do we circumvent that kind of risk? How do we go about it?
I think like it needs a lot of preparation before we just go into it saying we are done trading. We are done trading with the Western markets. We are just focusing on ourselves. We do need a lot more preparation with that. We need basically our leaders to step up and provide enough like development with its people. And I do think that there's no revolution that comes without some sort of loss. We've seen it even with like earning our democracies from these countries. To an extent, we've lost lives, we've lost resources, we've lost land, we've lost properties. So any sort of economic revolution we're going to get as Africans will come at a cost. And that is something that our political leaders need to come together, explain to its citizens, and also assure them that this is something that is going to take a little while, but it's still going to affect us and it's going to affect us deeply. And people need to be able to understand that. And I think that once that message has reached the average person, we're going to expect losses of people traveling abroad. We're going to expect people not meeting up to like their needs, not being able to pay civil servants. But then that's why if we are into trading, right, we should be able to provide ourselves with enough resources as Africans to maintain some sort of a decent life. We might not be able to have the best of the best, but our servants should be able to have a housing, food, and security, the basic human rights. And I think that can be achieved through intertrading while we work on development. And obviously, while we're doing that, that's not going to be a chance for us to see major economic growth. It's not going to be when we see major technological advancements, but it will be our struggle season where we see the ideas and the new generation and even some of the old generation coming together and coming up with new ways to overcome our crisis. Most ideas are thought of in the dark. When things are not going well, that's when I forgot the saying, but it's I think necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
Yes. So
that's correct.
You when you put everybody in that need, that we can no longer depend on the way the world has been functioning for all these years. We need to be able to stand by ourselves as individual continents and as individual countries, the way the Western powers do. They have tag teamed now and then, but if they separate today, they can still be their own country. Africans, there are very few African countries that can stand on their own and say, I am an African country by myself. We need each other. And if we find a way to completely work together and come together, I feel like it can be achieved with a lot of struggle, with a lot of pain, and possibly a lot of blood in between. But it is something that is doable. It's just that it puts it in this idealistic mindset because of all the risk that is attached to it. But nothing good comes without risk. If it's easy, everybody would have done it. And you see, like in our past years, when it has been tried to be done, forces have come in between it being done.
I like that, forces.
So you see that if it didn't have the possibility, nobody would have stopped it. If Gaddafi wasn't going to make sense, nobody would have stopped it. It would have just continued and then it would have ended by itself. So there is some sort of threat that the forces see as well. They know that this is a possibility, and them hoarding resources to cover whatever like loss they might think that we'll face while we negotiate. That's also going to run out because unfortunately for them, we're in a huge crisis of over-consumerism. People use a lot more than they have. The average person has.
That's true, actually. And that actually has taken a toll on our environment, worldwide. We can see now, and we can also feel the pressure of climate change.
Exactly.
So I get it. I get what you're saying. And so, like, I mean, in addition to the economic revolution that like you were suggesting, I think the way I understand the whole thing is that this also is going to be doable with like a strong government and public support.
Yes.
Because like what you promoted, for instance, like the intra-trade, I mean, last time I was doing some research and I came across like an article saying that the members of the African Union are busy drafting a like some sort of like intra-trade protocol from North Africa to Southern Africa to make sure that they are going to implement like a free trade area, where Africans are going to be able, to do trade among themselves. So maybe I think what you're suggesting is also meeting the current momentum that is actually to promote economic Pan-Africanism. And like I say, I'm a strong believer of economic Pan-Africanism instead of political Pan-Africanism. But sometimes we also notice that it's very difficult to implement the kind of economic change, especially at a larger scale, without having the support of the political.
Okay.
So I think, what you're saying makes sense. I still see some risk, because especially with our generation, I think if your proposal if your proposal was made in the 70s or in the 80s, maybe to me it would have been less risky. Why? Because right now we are living in the globalization era. Like every country, every continent are all interconnected now. Like you see, like you were Nigerian, for instance, but you were born in South Africa, you lived in South Africa, you traveled across the world. I'm Ivorian, but I've studied overseas. I met a lot of people, and even our day-to-day life is now strongly dependent on internet, for instance. When looking at the public administration in Africa, now one of the key recommendations from international organizations such as the World Bank or IFC or the IMF is to also digitalize, our public administration, which again take us to the beginning. We are the owner of the natural resources, but we do not own the technology. So imagine, for instance, because we've seen that between America and China, whenever money comes to play, government are willing to do whatever it takes to protect the market, but to also protect their economy. So, for instance, with the Chinese-American war, we've noticed it at the international trade level, we've seen that now Huawei lost the battle. They are no longer authorized to use the software that they were previously using because the technology belongs to America. And because they refused to actually comply with some American recommendation and rules, now they've been sanctioned. And I suspect that with what you're suggesting, the same scenario might actually replicate. So imagine, for instance, reaching a context where like those big companies such as Google, like Apple, like Facebook, like all the giants, in the world that decide, for instance, to remove their cable, from our oceans. And they decide to cut the entire African continent from accessing internet. I mean, what can we do about that? Because on one hand, I mean, this may sound too dramatic.
Yes.
I'm aware of it, but I mean, this is also a possibility we should not condone. It might happen because we are going at war, with them, saying that we now refusing to sell you our natural resources. We want you to pay us a fair price. So we should also expect some sort of like resistance from them, saying, okay, if you want to play the game where you want to hold off on your natural resources, you are also going to hold off on our technology. So what are you going to do about that? Especially our generation. Like we are in our 30s and we are strongly dependent on internet. We are strongly, unfortunately, we are also strongly dependent on international and Western culture, Western lifestyle. Like, do you think this is not going to be a problem?
I think it definitely will be a problem. But if you look at it with the way the world is evolving, there's really no better time than now, because the more we grow together, the more intertwined the world becomes, the smaller it becomes. So there will not be a time where we are more disconnected than we are now. We're only going to get closer and closer. Trade is going to get more and more mixed up. People are going to be a lot more connected to one another, even though there's seas between us. So even if we did it in the 70s, the 80s, we had just come out of like a lot of African countries getting their democracy. We were still mixed, we were still intertwined, and we didn't know that the future would get this hectic. So now, sitting in 2024, we don't know what 2025 has. They might build a bridge connecting each country, but we're not entirely sure how much more closer we're going to get. So it's always going to be that, and there's always going to be that risk. And I think it will lead to a lot of African middle class and higher middle class leaving and trying to find greener pastures or wherever they think is better that side. With the bigger powers withdrawing their resources, that might be inevitable. But the thing is, their resources depend on our resources. America and China thing happening with Huawei and their Google, they are battling on the same battlefield. So it's tech versus tech. You can't use that against Africa. Your tech relies on our natural resources. Yes, you transform our natural resources to your tech, but you still rely on us. So we still have like a higher like bidding war towards them. Yes, we don't have necessarily the manufacturers or the process to change our resource into that tech, but we've still got the things. We've got the iron, we've got the rubber, we've got the cobalt. They have the processing power and maybe the brain power right now. But skill is something that can be taught in Africa. Skill is something that is in Africa. And you see like in the recent years, a lot of our skill, a lot of our knowledge has been, for lack of a better word, stolen. So we've gotten this mass migration of our most skilled and our most knowledgeable to these Western countries. And that's something we need to retain to make sure that we can continue our developments inside Africa. And once there is intertrade, and once we see that there's a lack in this section, people will rise up and fill that. You've seen it in countries where political power isn't necessarily like providing them with the things they need. You see a massive spike in small businesses. You see a massive spike in digital enhancements and people coming together to fill up their own needs without relying on government. So if we have a gap where we don't have the things from the Western world, it's going to hurt. Definitely. You don't get kicked in the legs and not feel anything. It's going to hurt. But we will stand up again and learn to walk. And once we can do that, I think that will be like extra difficult for now, especially for the West to try and come and renegotiate with us. Because I think that's what is holding them. Because once Africa has manufacturing, once Africa has the processing, we've already got the resources, we've already got the consumers to buy it. So it's going to be, that's basically what's stopping us. And if you look, only recently has, if we look at South Africa, only recently have they gotten their own diamond polishing section. And they've been exporting diamonds for years. So for something as little as that to now be in SA and to continue other like sector, it will bleed into other sectors where we'll see like other parts of it like increasing and getting better and getting more advanced without influence from the Western world. I think then we'll see like a great shift in the economy where Africa holds like a majority of the power, and now we're now looking at different negotiations. So I think as much as we see that, the West will see it as well, and they will now see, okay, yes, we can hold off our negotiations to this point, but after that point, when Africans start to now develop themselves and they start to get their own things in order, we become useless to Africans. And they're no longer the superpower. So the only thing left is either a war or renegotiate. And as much as yes, a war is taxing. You can't, one country cannot go into a battle with 52 countries.
Yeah.
It's not, we don't have the same power as they do, but there's more of us. So I think we're just going to have to get to a point where resources will have to stand on its own, make sure that we know the value of our resources, but also accept the risks that we have while mitigating as much as we can. And a lot of that also depends on our political power.
And that's a conclusion for part 2 of our series on maximizing Africa's revenue from the international trade of its raw resources. We've covered some groundbreaking strategy today, from policy reforms and technological innovation to sustainable practices. I also enjoyed playing the devil advocate and also being very grammatical, when presenting some of the most hectic scenarios that might actually happen should the continent decide to go down this road. But overall, I think it's clear that Africa has immense potential to not only compete but to lead in the global market. Remember, this is just the beginning. The journey to transforming our continent's trade landscape is a collective effort. So let's keep the conversation going. In the comments below, share your thoughts, your critiques, and your own ideas on how we can drive Africa trade to new heights. And also stay tuned for the last part of this very dynamic conversation. If you found this video valuable, you know what to do. Give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, subscribe, and thank you very much, for watching, for supporting your favorite podcast, S.I.K.A Talks, the podcast where strong realities meet powerful perspectives. À bientôt.